I never thought I would be telling this story, but 3 days ago something happened that made me realize I had to warn people about what really goes on at schools like Warwood Elementary, and I can't keep this buried inside me anymore because the memories are flooding back like a dam has burst in my mind and I'm drowning in the horror of what they did to us children. My name is Alex and I'm 22 years old now, but when I was just 6 years old in the year 2000, I attended a small private school in Georgia called Warwood Elementary where about 300 kids went to classes in a building that looked normal from the outside but hid something so terrible underneath that even now, as I write this, my hands are shaking and I keep looking over my shoulder expecting to see those twisted faces again. The school seemed perfect at first, nestled among tall pine trees with a playground that was bigger than most schools twice our size. And my teacher, Mrs. Anderson, was the sweetest woman you could imagine with short graying hair and kind eyes that made every parent trust her completely. But what we didn't know was that she was part of something dark and ancient that had been going on in that school for years before we ever arrived. I was just a quiet kid back then, barely speaking above a whisper, and I had made friends with a boy named Tony who was my constant companion, along with Scotty and Phil who were a year older and seemed so worldly to us first graders with their knowledge of playground secrets and older sibling gossip. It all started during lunch one day when a boy named Eddie leaned over to me with fear in his eyes and whispered about something called the bad chair, and the way he said it sent chills down my spine even though I had no idea what he was talking about. But when I asked him to explain, he looked around nervously and told me that there was a secret room underneath the school that could only be reached through a hidden door in the teacher's lounge, and in that room sat a wooden chair with leather straps where they took the really bad kids who misbehaved too much. Eddie told me about J-Boy, a fourth grader who everyone knew was trouble, always setting things on fire and destroying property. But one day he just vanished from school, and when kids asked where he went, the teacher said he moved away. But Eddie whispered that J-Boy had been taken to the bad chair and something terrible had happened to him down there in the darkness. I couldn't stop thinking about what Eddie had told me, and when I asked Tony and my other friends about it during recess while we hid inside the big plastic dinosaur dome on the playground, they thought it was just a made-up story to scare the younger kids. But then Steve appeared at the entrance to our hiding spot and everything changed forever. Steve was a fifth grader who was sick with cancer and got to have recess with the younger kids sometimes, and when he heard us talking about the bad chair, his face went completely white and he crawled inside the dome with us, looking around frantically to make sure no teachers were watching, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he told us that the bad chair was real and that J-Boy had been the first kid to ever escape from it with his memories intact. According to Steve, J-Boy had been taken down into the basement room by the teachers after his last act of rebellion, and down there in the flickering candlelight, he had been strapped into an old wooden chair that had a human skull mounted at the top where your head would rest, and while he was trapped there unable to move, figures in black robes had appeared and begun dancing around him in impossible ways, their bodies bending and twisting like they weren't human anymore, and they whispered things in a language that hurt to hear while J-Boy screamed and screamed, but no one above could hear him because he was too far underground. Steve said that something had gone wrong during J-Boy's session in the bad chair, some kind of mistake that allowed him to remember everything instead of having his mind wiped clean like all the other kids who had been taken down there over the years. And that's how we knew about it at all, because normally the kids who went to the bad chair came back with no memory of what happened to them. Just as Steve was finishing his terrifying story, Mrs. Chandra, the recess monitor, suddenly appeared at the entrance to the dome and we all screamed in pure terror, thinking we had been caught learning forbidden secrets, but she just laughed and told Steve not to scare the younger children with his stories, and after she left, Steve ran away and we never saw him again because he died in the hospital a few weeks later, taking whatever other secrets he knew to his grave. The rumors about the bad chair spread through the school like wildfire after that, with older kids whispering that if you misbehaved badly enough, you would be taken downstairs and strapped into the chair, and whatever happened to you there would either kill you or leave you as a hollow shell of yourself with no memory of who you used to be. Everything seemed to calm down after Steve died, and we almost convinced ourselves that the whole thing had been just a scary story, until the very last day of first grade when something happened that proved everything Steve had told us was true and far worse than we could have imagined. We were having a pizza party with the second grade class when a boy named William came running back from the bathroom looking like he had seen death itself, his face completely drained of color and his whole body shaking so violently that he threw up right there on the classroom carpet while all of us kids watched in horror. The teachers tried to calm him down and get him to explain what had upset him so badly, but all he could do was sob and scream that he had seen Steve, dead Steve, and when they pressed him for details, William managed to gasp out that Steve had been on the bathroom floor moving around, but he wasn't alive and he wasn't really Steve anymore. He was something else entirely that wore Steve's face but moved like a broken puppet. After that incident, William was pulled out of school and homeschooled, and new rules were put in place that kids could never go to the bathroom alone. They always had to bring a buddy, and suddenly there were recess monitors everywhere watching us constantly like they were afraid we might discover something we weren't supposed to know. The summer between first and second grade was filled with nightmares and questions that had no answers, but when we returned to school in the fall, we learned from other kids that more students had been disappearing, going to detention and coming back with no memory of what happened to them, just like Steve had warned us would happen if the bad chair worked properly on them. Things got even stranger in second grade when Scotty told us that his older brother had been sent to detention for cheating on a test, but when Scotty asked him about it later, his brother claimed he couldn't remember anything about detention at all, said he must have fallen asleep or something, and then he started crying for no reason that he could explain, which made all of us realize that his brother had probably been taken to the bad chair and had his memory wiped clean just like all the others. Then one day during math class, all the lights in the school suddenly went out and we heard the most horrible screaming and crying coming from the kindergarten classroom down the hall, the sound of dozens of little children in absolute terror, and it went on for 3 minutes of complete darkness before the lights came back on and the screaming stopped as suddenly as it had started. When we asked the kindergarten kids what had happened during recess, the few who were brave enough to talk told us the most disturbing story I had ever heard, about how their teacher, Miss Natasha, had made them take a nap after saying a strange prayer that wasn't to God but to something else with a name they couldn't pronounce, and how during the prayer they had felt tingly and sleepy in a way that wasn't natural, and then while they were supposed to be sleeping, something had come into their classroom, something that stood over each of them one by one and somehow knew all their names even though it had never met them before, and one little boy named Joshua who played with tennis balls that he had drawn faces on told us that whatever came into their room had touched all of them and left something behind inside each child. The worst part was that none of the kindergarten kids told their parents what had happened, and when we asked them why not, they just smiled these empty smiles and said they didn't need to tell anyone because everything was fine now, everything was beautiful, and the way they said it made my skin crawl because it was the same tone of voice that people use when they're under some kind of spell or control. School continued normally after that, or at least it seemed normal on the surface, but I started noticing things that didn't make sense, like how certain kids would disappear for a day or two and come back acting different, quieter, more obedient, like something important had been taken out of them and replaced with something else. Years passed and I tried to forget about Warwood Elementary and the bad chair, telling myself it had all been childhood imagination and scary stories that got out of hand. But 3 days ago my mother told me something that shattered that comfortable lie and made me realize that the horror I thought I had escaped had actually caught me too. She mentioned casually that during my second grade year, my friends and I had gotten in trouble for drawing inappropriate things on our teacher's whiteboard and had been sent to detention. But when she said this, I felt ice water in my veins because I had absolutely no memory of drawing anything on a whiteboard or being sent to detention, which could only mean one thing: we hadn't been sent to detention at all. We had been taken to the bad chair, and whatever happened to us down there had worked perfectly, wiping our memories clean and leaving us as hollow, obedient shells. This realization drove me to return to Georgia and find the school that had once been Warwood Elementary, and when I arrived, I discovered that the building was still there, but it had been renamed and most of the original staff had quit or been transferred to different locations all across the country, almost like they had been scattered deliberately to prevent anyone from asking too many questions about what had really gone on there. The woman at the front desk told me that only one teacher from the Warwood days still worked at the school, Miss Natasha, the same kindergarten teacher who had made those children pray to something dark and unknown, and when I asked to speak with her, I felt my heart racing because I knew I was about to come face to face with one of the people who had destroyed my childhood and stolen my memories. While I waited for school to end so I could meet with Natasha, I decided to use the restroom, and as I was washing my hands, a young boy came in and stood there staring at me with these strange, knowing eyes, asking if I was someone's daddy and telling me I looked like someone's daddy, and there was something so unsettling about the way he watched me that I hurried out of there as fast as I could, but not before I noticed that the door to the teacher's lounge was right across the hall, and on impulse, I decided to test the doorknob and found that it was unlocked. My heart was pounding as I stepped inside the lounge and saw exactly what I expected to see, a normal break room with a fridge and coffee maker and chairs, but also the door that Eddie and Steve had told us about all those years ago, the door that led down to the room with the bad chair, and even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run away, I found myself approaching that door and turning the handle, hearing it creak open to reveal a dark staircase that descended straight down into the bowels of the building. Cold air rushed up from the darkness below and my head immediately began to throb with a pain that got worse with every step I took down those stairs, like my body was trying to warn me about what I was walking into, but I couldn't stop myself because I needed to know the truth about what had happened to me and my friends. At the bottom of the staircase, I found a light switch and flicked it on, expecting to see the torture chamber that Steve had described with candles and satanic symbols and the terrible wooden chair, but instead I found what looked like an ordinary storage room filled with boxes and shelves, and for a moment I thought maybe I had been wrong about everything, maybe it really had all been just childhood nightmares and scary stories, but then I heard a voice behind me say, "Welcome back, Alex," and I turned to see Miss Natasha standing on the bottom step with a smile that made my blood freeze in my veins. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but she was wearing the same floral dress style she had worn when I was in first grade, and when I demanded to know what she had done to me in that room, she just smiled wider and told me to open one of the boxes, and even though I wanted to run, something inside me, something that had been planted there years ago, made me want to obey her command. She moved past me like she was floating on air and knelt down beside one of the larger boxes, reaching inside with her entire arm and grunting as she pulled something heavy out of it, and when I saw what she was holding, I fell to my knees because the memories came flooding back all at once like a dam bursting in my mind. It was a skull, but not from any human or animal I had ever seen. Something ancient and wrong that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent energy, and as soon as Natasha placed it on top of my head, I remembered everything being strapped into the wooden chair with leather bonds cutting into my wrists and ankles, watching teachers in black robes dance around me in ways that human bodies shouldn't be able to move, their faces distorted into impossible shapes while they chanted in a language that made my ears bleed. And seeing my friends Tony and Scotty and Phil in the corner of the room, sobbing and vomiting with their eyes rolled back in their heads as something dark and hungry fed on their fear and innocence. I remembered the ground shaking beneath us and freezing wind blowing from somewhere that wasn't part of our world, and I remembered seeing what they called Dead Steve in the corner, but he wasn't dead at all. He was something worse, something that had once been a sick little boy but was now a vessel for whatever ancient evil had been summoned into that underground chamber year after year, feeding on the terror and innocence of children and growing stronger with each new victim. I remembered all those days after I had been taken to the bad chair when I had sat in class like a zombie, my real self buried deep inside while something else controlled my body and made me the perfect, obedient student that never caused trouble or asked difficult questions. As the memories crashed over me like waves of pure horror, I realized that I had never really escaped from Warwood Elementary at all, that the thing they had put inside me during my time in the bad chair had been dormant for years but was now waking up again, and I could feel it stirring in the depths of my mind like a parasite that had been waiting for the right moment to take full control of me again. Natasha was still smiling that terrible smile as she told me that the work was never finished, that there was always a piece of the darkness left behind in every child who sat in the bad chair, and that eventually, that piece would grow and spread until there was nothing left of the original person, just another servant of whatever hungry entity they had been feeding with the terror and souls of innocent children for decades. I tried to run then, tried to flee up those stairs and out of that cursed building, but my legs wouldn't obey me because the thing inside my head was getting stronger by the second, and I could hear its whispers mixing with my own thoughts, telling me that I belonged down there in the darkness, that I had always belonged there, and that soon I would help them bring other children down to sit in the bad chair and experience the beautiful horror that awaited them in that underground chamber. The last coherent thought I had before the darkness took me completely was a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would read these words and understand that places like Warwood Elementary are still out there, still operating, still feeding their ancient hunger on the innocence of children, and that the smiling teachers and friendly staff are not what they seem to be. If you have children, watch them carefully, listen to their stories no matter how strange they might sound, and if they ever tell you about a bad chair or strange prayers or teachers who seem too perfect, too kind, too eager to help, then run as far away as you can, because once they get their hooks into your child, once they plant their seed of darkness in that innocent mind, there is no going back, no escape, no hope of ever being truly free again, and the beautiful horror will spread from one generation to the next until there is nothing left in the world but servants of the thing that waits in the darkness beneath our feet, hungry and patient and absolutely eternal.